The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Welcome to the PENC Wilmington Seminar on Ethics. We would like to thank our sponsors, ECS, McKim & Creed, and the North Carolina Society of Engineers. My name is Katie Cox, the PENC Membership Director, and I will be serving as moderator for today's seminar. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat box and I will assist you. We will be taking questions at the end of each presentation today. You can type those into the questions box and I will read them out loud for the speaker to answer. At 9:55, we will have a 5-minute break, and we will resume with the second session directly at 10 o'clock. Our first session today is Ethical Issues in Autonomous Vehicle Technology with Dr. Veljko Dublovic. Dr. Dublovic is an assistant professor of philosophy and science, technology, and society at NC State. Before arriving in Raleigh, he spent 3 years as a postdoctoral fellow at the Neuroethics Research Unit at IRCM and McGill University in Montreal, Canada. He studied philosophy and economics and obtained a PhD in political science. After that, he joined the research training group Bioethics at the University of Tübingen, and after studying philosophy, bioethics, and neuroscience there, obtained a doctorate in philosophy. Dr. Dublovic, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I hope everything, this is a new format for me, so I apologize for any quirks that happen along the way. I should probably also add that I lead the neurocomputational research, neurocomputational ethics research group at NC State, and I will be presenting some of our work. So if something is unclear, feel free to plug in a question. I would be happy to clarify and answer all of those. I've changed the title slightly to kind of more general AI and ethics because some of the things we'll be talking are not strictly limited to autonomous vehicles, although most of my talk will be about autonomous vehicles. So today I'm going to be presenting actually something that is 4 different projects and 4 different papers, and we'll be talking about the perspectives on autonomous vehicles from professional drivers. This is the group that is likely to be most affected by the introduction of this technology. Perspectives by experts in different disciplines on autonomous vehicles. Media coverage of AI ethics in general. That's why I changed the title to AI and ethics, kind of in the more general way. And last but not least, this is the hardest topic. I don't know how much of interest you guys will have. I wanted us first to kind of get a sort of warming up with AI and autonomous vehicles and ethics topics first, and go into programming ethical decision making in autonomous vehicles. This is a topic that is timely. I think it's extremely important, and many across the globe, many researchers and companies think so as well. So let's see how this goes. So let's start with the sort of introduction. Why should we be interested in these topics? Well, the field of artificial intelligence has grown significantly in recent years, and it's now pervasive. So everywhere we look, every kind of social interaction we are engaging in, there is some sort of AI sort of agent or AI technology enabling or modulating how we go about our business, from listening to music to wielding telephone calls to transportation. So a variety of types of artificial intelligence, including personal assistants such as Siri, Alexa, are becoming more and more prevalent in our lives. And this has brought a range of ethical debates. The debates are various, and there's issues such as how can we make sure that AI technology implementation is fair and transparent. I'll just give you one example. A couple of years ago, I asked Siri to lead me to the nearest insurance office. And unbeknownst to me, Google has been paid to, or actually Apple or someone else was paid by a insurance office to push their results to be above all others. So I ended up traveling 10 miles for an insurance office I did not want to go in because I was led by Siri, right? So the issue of transparency, how the information is being provided by AI agents, is coming to the fore. In terms of responsibility, autonomous vehicles are a case in point. If something goes amiss and there was no designated driver, there was the autonomous vehicle who should be held accountable. I'm not going to resolve this issue. I'm just kind of going through the various social and ethical issues that are extremely important to kind of consider. The third question is how autonomous vehicles and artificial intelligence agents can be programmed to behave ethically. One might wonder why we should ask this question, but the long and short of it is that if we do not program anything, then they will behave unethically. It stands to reason that optimization of systems will prioritize certain values. And we have seen from previous kinds of research that these values reflect only the values of the programmers or the manufacturers, leading consumers or certain vulnerable groups to be, well, in some way treated unfairly. So in effect, AI agents are sort of agents of unethical action by producers or manufacturers. And this is something we should be caring about. Now, these issues are very complex, and I've used this. I don't know if you can take a look at the figure that is. I will not go through everything there, but the take-home message from that is that it's complex on the social and on the technical level. And when we're talking about these issues, we really need to be cognizant of the technical capabilities as well as the social issues that are implicated. And for that, we need to have a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary dialogue. So let's move on to the next slide, where I'm going to kind of present you with the background and the methods of the first two aims or papers that I will be presenting today. So the first one, as I said, is the interview of the drivers. If we are embarking upon a major change in our transportation system, and we are, if we are working on the full-scale incorporation of autonomous vehicles, we have to have a better grasp of how certain groups such as professional and semi-professional drivers are going to be coping. So for that, I was leading along with some colleagues from computer science and transportation engineering at NC State. I was leading a study looking at interviews with professional and semi-professional drivers. So recruitment was actually really hard. Drivers do not trust anyone who does anything with autonomous vehicles. They're very mistrustful of the technology and very sort of wary of providing any answers. In the words of one person, I don't want to give you anything that will make this technology come sooner than it will, right? So they are a closed and hidden population, and I will present just the initial data, which comprises from interviews with 5 ride-hailing app drivers, so Uber or Lyft, and 4 professional truck drivers. The other paper that I'll be presenting is the second paper will be about media coverage of AI and ethics. We wanted to get a better grasp of how the lay public is understanding these issues, social and ethical issues in the introduction of artificial intelligence technology. We opted for a more general approach, so not merely focusing on autonomous vehicles, because we figured it will be caught within the more general discussion. So we conducted a formal search using Nexus Uni for articles that focus on artificial intelligence and ethics in recent years. So we coded for very important sort of thematic aspects such as the year, the issue being discussed, principle and ethical framework that is being mentioned, type of recommendations, what the society should do with the technology, tone of the article, and type of AI. I have to explain that the tone of the article is sometimes used in qualitative research when we're looking at media representation of technology, to get a better glimpse of whether the media is hyping a technology, so if it's overly enthusiastic tone, or the media is fear-mongering, so it's overly negative tone, or the media is providing a balanced coverage of the topic. Now I'll go through the sort of background and methods for the other two papers, and again, apologize, there's a lot of text, but there we go. For the third paper, we wanted to take a look at the expert perspectives on the harmfulness and the benefits of introduction of autonomous vehicles. So we conducted, as I mentioned, with colleagues from the NC State College of Engineering, a multi-criteria decision analysis exercise to develop a formal questionnaire which can be used to assess the technology in the future. We named this questionnaire a multi-attribute impact assessment, and we wanted to have a sort of well-rounded view of what are the key social and ethical issues associated with the uptake of artificial intelligence in general and autonomous vehicles in particular. So the basic tenet of multi-criteria decision analysis is that it can provide a defensible insight into the way people see multifaceted impacts of technological change. One person cannot fathom all there is to consider. When we're talking about such major changes in our transportation network and society, one person or even a few people cannot even begin to describe what's at stake. But a sort of structured process in which we are thinking about the criteria in which we are saying, okay, this will change in this or that direction, sort of paring down to multiple smaller assessments in order to generate the larger assessment. That is the key principle of multi-criteria decision analysis. So we elicited expert opinions about the impacts of autonomous vehicles through first a Delphi exercise. A Delphi exercise means that we anonymously contact experts and ask them for their feedback. And then we held a consensus workshop here at NC State and on February 21st of this year. We collected the operational evidence regarding the moral, social, and economic benefits and harms of autonomous vehicles. The fourth thrust of the work that I will be presenting today is looking at more complex issues, and that is how and if it is possible to program the flexible tenets of human morality into autonomous vehicles. Now, why would we need to do that? Well, there is a lot of conflict in terms of what should guide our decision making in terms of how the vehicle should behave. Should they guard their passenger at all costs? In the literature that has been named selfish autonomous vehicles, or should they guard the number of lives that are potentially lost? That has been named utilitarian autonomous vehicles in the literature. There's a lot of discussion about that, and the issue is that whatever we choose, this will not reflect the complexity of human morality unless we root this discussion into the research and neurocognitive systems of human decision making. I think this is enough for the background, and again, I said that this is the hardest of those topics, and I left it for last because frankly I'm worried I will bore you to death. So let's move on to the first topic, and that is the interviews with professional and semi-professional drivers. Based on our data, we can conclude that the relevant stakeholders are keenly aware of and following developments in the implementation of autonomous vehicles technology. So part-time drivers such as Uber and Lyft drivers are more open to this technology because this is not their career, this is not their livelihood. It's usually a sort of side job for them, but they still forecast problems. In the words of one Uber driver, he's saying that there's no coincidence that Google Waymo is testing their technology in Scottsdale because of the planning there is grid-like and hot during the day, which is the only time they are active. So there's less pedestrians, less bicyclists, and less danger. In other places, and we can imagine someone running, let's say, an autonomous vehicle in Boylan Heights, in Raleigh, or some other place where the streets are not really grid-like and there's a lot of pedestrians, that would implicate a lot of problems. So the key take-home message from this is if we have a control system with few people interacting with autonomous vehicles, they work remarkably well. As soon as we enter the chaos of human decision-making, so people jaywalking or people breaking rules, and people will do that, right? That is too complex for autonomous vehicles to fathom. Professional drivers, on the other hand, not only see problems, but they're vehemently opposed to automation in general. They have practical and moral reasons. So one professional driver said that their experience with automation is negative all around. So in prior ages, humans were loading the truck trailer, and they could reason with humans, argue that something is better done in this or that way. And nowadays, everything is done by robots, and there's no arguing with robots. So they forget something is not sort of, it's more rigid, it's less flexible, and there's less opportunities for the social interaction where problems can be anticipated and solved. Another point that professional truck drivers are raising is safety, and they're extremely kind of anxious about what's going to happen with their jobs. So they think that automation technology, and they use the Tesla fatal accidents in terms of this is the new technology which will lead to loss of lives, loss of jobs, and it is completely wrong. This is their opinion. Now let's move on to the prominent themes. I'm mindful of the time. So if we look at what are the key takeaways from this work with interviews with professional and semi-professional drivers, is that first of all, autonomous vehicles will have a significant impact on transportation, and that is inevitable. The second theme is that employers should be transparent and straightforward about the changes and options toward potentially affected stakeholders. This sort of atmosphere of unknown, the future which is in jeopardy and so on, so forth, is causing a lot of problems. And if employers are proactive about addressing these concerns, that can do a lot of good with these affected groups. Reskilling may be manageable due to the need for almost a decade for implementation of autonomous vehicles technology. And this may be generous. Technology can change sometimes very rapidly, but based on our understanding of the difficulties in the technology and the assessment of professionals, semi-professional drivers, it will not, they will not be replaced for at least 1 decade, which gives us as a society enough time to think about reskilling options for those people who will be left out of jobs, right? And for their families, because for every driver that is out of employment, we can count on at least 2 to 3 people who are losing their livelihood with them. So to the extent that driving jobs are unsatisfying and potentially unhealthy, so issues that have been raised are sleep apnea, obesity, and other issues connected with lack of movement, connected with sitting all day in a truck cabin, right, or in a car. Elimination of such jobs could be a good thing as long as other options are available. So the final note is that the responsibility for dealing with these issues falls across all elements of society. We can't really pin this only on the government. So employees themselves should be proactive and think about whether their job will be automated in the future. Businesses need to be clear in terms of whether jobs that are currently offering will be there in 2 years' time. And government should be more proactive in terms of offering reskilling opportunities and thinking about the workforce of the future. I'm going to move on to the analysis of the media coverage of issues of ethics and AI. And I know I'm rushing through things, but there's a lot of stuff to cover, so I apologize if you have trouble following. What we find that is that the society is extremely interested in issues of artificial intelligence and ethics. And as you can see, the amount of articles in the print media is increasing on an annual basis. And what we see is that we started off on the tangent of having either balanced, oh, sorry, technical glitch. Sorry about that. We started on the tangent of having entirely balanced or enthusiastic coverage. And in 2015, the critical coverage started gaining in prominence. In 2016, we had kind of more of a mixed batch, and 2017, again, more balanced and critical, which tells us that we have this cycle of early enthusiasm and then backlash from society. There is a sizable segment of the media that is trying to provide a neutral or a balanced picture, but we have these, what I like to call hype and hope sort of articles promising everything. So awesome changes that will solve all of our problems. And those that I call doom and gloom, sort of fear-mongering articles that are interested in stoking fears about widespread loss of jobs and other negative impacts of the technology. Now, in terms of the major issues that are identified in the print media literature, most notable is the issue of prejudice, which we mentioned in the introduction. There are concerns that algorithms will sort of prolong deeply rooted prejudices in society. And the second most common issue is a concern about privacy and data protection. Third is transparency. Fourth, job loss due to artificial intelligence or the economic impact of AI. And the fifth is the issue of how AI is making decisions that are affecting humans. We are now more and more sort of aware that certain decisions are no longer made by a human. I'll just sort of give this example of a person that was fired by AI. So what happened is that an automated system started sending emails to the security in a company that this person needs to be removed. And this was actually a problem. This was a technical glitch. So their supervisor forgot to extend the validity of their contract. So they were a bi-weekly employee. And due to that one error, a cascade of events was initiated and completed by AI that led to a very embarrassing situation in which this person was escorted by security from the premises. Now, AI is affecting real people, and we really need to think about how the human and AI decision-making is meshing together and how humans are affected. In terms of recommendations that the media literature is giving to the public, 82% of articles mentioned a recommendation, not all of them did. And the nature of most of these recommendations is showing that the debate is still in the early stages, but it's not completely unsophisticated. It's not really shallow. So the recommendations highlight the need to harness the potential benefits of AI while mitigating negative effects. The most common recommendation is to develop ethical guidelines, and that's easier said than done, right? The second most important is to engage in more public debate, and I'm happy to say that it feels to me that we're doing this now, right? We're engaging in the public debate on the ethical and social issues of AI and autonomous vehicles technology. The third issue is to kind of guarantee algorithmic transparency. We'll be talking a bit about that in the fourth segment. Fourth is collaboration across fields. As I mentioned, these issues are so complex, we cannot really invite a couple of ethicists or invite a few social scientists or engineers or computer scientists to kind of deal with everything by themselves. We need to have interdisciplinary teams working together sharing perspectives and piling strengths in both methodologies and knowledge, background knowledge, in order to tackle these issues. The final is empowering ethics committees or ethicists. We've seen that Google has experimented with that, having an internal review board which lasted the full week, right, before it was disbanded. The public or the media, I should say, is recommended that more oversight and more formal formal aspects of how ethicists may be involved in the decision making and the production process may be necessary. So if you want to find out more, this paper has been published in the journal AI Society. The link is there. You can just click on the link. It will lead you to the paper. It is open access, thanks to the Keenan Institute for Science and Technology, who paid for the publication charges. So anyone can access it and get the full scope of the data. Now I'm going to move on to the more complex topic, and that is the multi-criteria decision analysis for autonomous vehicles in 4 regulatory environments. I'm sorry for the typo. The AV should be capitalized. It is what it is. So as I mentioned, we developed a novel application of the multi-criteria decision analysis method, which we call the multi-attribute impact assessment. So I should perhaps backtrack in terms of what that means. It's not that we developed a completely new method. We are using the MCDA method. It's just that you cannot use the method unless you have a formal set of criteria. So in my previous work with multi-criteria decision analysis, I have been looking at the harmfulness and benefits of medication, right? So it's a whole new ballgame in kind of moving from medication to autonomous vehicles, and one person cannot do that alone. So it is important to have an interdisciplinary team of experts in providing insights in which types of sort of technology changes might be ethically and socially relevant. So as I mentioned, you can take a look at the left-hand side. We have pulled a number of experts from different kinds of backgrounds. Political science is, of course, relevant because we are talking about the regulatory environment in which the autonomous vehicles will be implemented. Civil and transportation engineering is absolutely necessary because we need to have the firm grasp of the technology and what is feasible and what is not feasible. In terms of the ethical issues, we had to have strong representation from ethics, and we had 3 leading experts in artificial intelligence and computer science who are already collaborating with engineers from civil and transportation engineering and working on autonomous vehicles issues. We also had a colleague dealing with organizational behavior, because we wanted to have a sort of point of view from the industrial psychology perspective. Because if we are only having voices that are heavily loaded with engineering or computer science or ethics and political science, we might be missing something. I should add that we have diversified the pool to include it's a diverse pool, both in backgrounds, which are disciplinary, but also in ethnicity, religion, gender, and race. The reason why we do not have more experts and why we didn't have, let's say, 5 experts in organizational behavior is that with workshop conferencing for multi-criteria decision analysis, 20 is the upper limit. If you go above that, it is just not manageable. So this is the amount of people we recruited. We thought that this is the best strategy. So we identified 21 impacts for which we sought expert opinions about their importance. It's not the same thing to say that something is relevant. For instance, we might say it's relevant if autonomous vehicles are going to reduce the amount of pollution. That's certainly socially and ethically relevant, but it's not the same kind of relevance if we say that this will decrease the number of deaths on the road. So it is not enough to say which criteria are important, but also to assign weights of how important that criteria is. In order to kind of compare the introduction of autonomous vehicles in society, we needed to use first the status quo, which is the situation as it is now. So to consider what is the impact on the environment of traditional vehicles, what is the impact on the economic system, and how many deaths on the road we have, and the number is shocking, but there we have it. But we also have to consider that there are different ways that technology may be introduced. And since the United States is comprised with many states, and many states would have different approaches to regulation. So for instance, we can assume that Texas and other places where they're not really keen on regulation will perhaps have unfettered AVs. That means a transportation system in which there are no specific regulations apart from the regulations for regular vehicles, and the implementation is unfettered for commercial entities. So the tech industry can actually do as they please. So Texas, maybe Arizona, maybe some other places may be experimenting with this strategy. In states that are not really averse to regulation, such as North Carolina, but they're not too keen on regulation as well, we might have a regulated, privately owned autonomous vehicle. So that would be a transportation system in which autonomous vehicles are regulated similarly to traditional passenger vehicles, but they still have to be inspected, and there are areas in which they can be operated. For instance, we can imagine that at start of their operation, they can only be operated in highways and certain dedicated roads, whereas other places where there's a lot of children, school areas, pedestrians, cyclists, and so on forth would be off limits for autonomous vehicles. As I mentioned, North Carolina may or may not opt for that sort of system. The reason why I say may or may not, North Carolina on the one hand is not averse to regulating all sorts of things, including where someone goes to the bathroom. On the other hand, it is less keen on sort of state coercion. So I'm not sure which states would opt for this. I should also add that these kinds of implementation work not only for states in the United States, but also for different countries across the world. And these are the kinds of implementation scenarios that we came up with as being feasible and realistic. The last kind of scenario is the most regulatory burdensome. And we can imagine states such as Massachusetts or New York kind of opting for that kind of system. And that is a transportation system which is completely regulated, and autonomous vehicles are not actually allowed to be owned by individuals, but only by commercial fleets, which reduces the chaos of human decision making. So if the industry has to uphold certain standards, and if we want to do frequent inspections of how things are done, then we are not leaving it to individuals who may modify their autonomous vehicles or opt to disregard rules about where they can and cannot operate them and so on. Whereas a logistic company will, due to the danger of lawsuits, will be more careful than any individual in terms of their behavior on the road. Since I'm a faculty member at NC State, I'm keenly reminded about what happens if we trust in individual humans on what should be done. We trusted our freshman students to behave, and we were sorely disappointed. They did not. They created Corona parties where they drank Corona beer and infected each other with Corona. So if we have a privately owned autonomous vehicle system or unfettered autonomous vehicle system, we will have people who are fresh out of college or even in college having access to this technology and doing all sorts of stuff that we did not intend for them to do. Regulated fleet-owned autonomous vehicles would dampen this kind of decisional chaos or complexity in the system. Now, having said that, we do not know. Maybe society will opt for something completely different. This is our educated opinion or expert opinion on what is most likely and most feasible. Technology may change, and we might see something that we did not foresee. But this is what we started working with. So the different types of systems that are abbreviated. So I'm going to be using abbreviations or system 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what follows. Now, if we're talking about the criteria, I'm mindful of the time, I think I need to speed up so that we go through everything. As I mentioned, it is important to consider mortality, specific damage, and related damage. So I'll give a couple of examples. So vehicle-specific damage is related to amount of crashes, let's say tail-end crashes with autonomous vehicles. Vehicle-related damage is the damage to the environment. Vehicle system encroachment on human living is the changes in how our communities and cities are well set up. So parkings may disappear or may proliferate. Harms of vehicle-related occupational injuries. If we are more likely to be more in a vehicle, that might mean that we are leading an unhealthy lifestyle. Harms of vehicle-related loss of time or productivity. So think of all those traffic jams you have been sitting in your traditional vehicle. Harms of vehicle-related loss of social engagement. If you're stuck in a traffic jam or commuting to work for 2 or 3 hours and socially isolated for 8 hours while working, that means that you have lost a lot of social engagement and a lot of time that you can spend with friends and family. Harms of vehicle-related injury to others, so hit and run incidents come to mind. Harms of vehicle-related economic costs in terms of jobs lost and so on and so forth. Harms of vehicle-related changes to community. Certain communities, such as African Americans or Latino Americans, may be affected disproportionately by the introduction of this technology. Harms of vehicle-related crime opportunities. Now, this one may come as a surprise, but this is what we found out from the Uber drivers. They said once there is no person in the vehicle who is to stop someone from raping someone in the autonomous vehicle. And this is something that needs to be taken very seriously. And last but not least, harms of vehicle-related economic changes. The economy may change in such a way that we did not foresee, and not just in terms of jobs lost and other types of costs to maintain the vehicles and so on and so forth, but indirect changes in the economy. I'll skip to the results. These are on the right-hand side. You can see what the results of the MCVA analysis were. The most harms are unsurprisingly in the system we have as it is now. And this is, I think, largely driven by the number of deaths on the road. The promise of autonomous vehicles to reduce the deaths on the road is really, I would say, the driving force behind a rapid introduction of this technology. However, it does make a difference which type of implementation system we opt for. The harms are reduced, but not as much if we have an unfettered AV system. The reason for that may be that pedestrians might take the brunt of the early bugs in the system, and that individuals might use the technology in ways that were not intended by the producers. Think of the coronavirus parties example I gave earlier. Regulated, privately owned autonomous vehicles reduce those harms significantly and may be the least regulatorily burdensome option. And the regulated fleet-owned autonomous vehicles would be the safest of them all in terms of reducing the kinds of harms that are affecting and likely to affect people. I'm going to switch now to the discussion of benefits and the criteria we use for benefits. Here you will see that we did not assess the status quo system, because this is the baseline against we were assessing that. And the benefits we included are based on recent reports from National Academies of Sciences in terms of ethics and ethical and social issues of technologies. So we adapted those for the autonomous vehicle technology. So the first benefit is promoting societal value. So for instance, increasing economic activity. Benefits of minimizing negative societal impacts, decrease in injury and death, protecting the interests of users such as professional drivers, advancing the preservation of the environment, maximizing the progress in science and technology, engaging the relevant communities, ensuring oversight and accountability, and recognizing appropriate governmental and policy roles. Now, I apologize for rushing through these slides. I'm really mindful of the time, but again, not surprisingly, we see that most benefits are accrued in a system that would be regulated fleet-owned autonomous vehicles. Regulated privately owned autonomous vehicles will provide some benefits, but not as much. And if we leave it to the industry to do as they please, so there is no control or there's a lack of regulation, there will be benefits, but not as many. That said, again, this is a forecast and we will see. I'm really happy to discuss again in, let's say, 10 years time, once we have different states implementing, and to kind of compare the numbers from those states that opted for more versus less regulation in terms of autonomous vehicles. I'm hoping that our study will be useful in terms of decision makers on state and federal level making informed decisions on what is the best way to introduce this technology. Finally, we did a harm benefit trade-off in terms of how much good versus bad the different kind of implementation of technology will bring us. And again, unsurprisingly, the best approach, according to our results, would be regulated fleet-owned autonomous vehicles. That is not to say that this is what's going to happen. States have lots of state legislatures have full freedom on deciding which type of implementation to pursue. But what we recommend is that the state legislatures and federal governments strongly consider incorporating our results and our criteria in their deliberations about the impacts of autonomous vehicles. We do not claim to speak for everyone, and it should be repeated. This type of exercise should be repeated by different actors, including industry actors, in order to see if we have agreement or disagreement. It may turn out that since we have experts working in academia, that we are biased in one or the other direction. So if, wish me luck, I've asked for National Science Foundation funding to discuss and explore this topic further. If we get those funds, we will have more results, and I'm happy to share them with you in a future iteration of a similar workshop. Now, our results point to the need to better address how the public views the trade-offs between safety and physical ecology, social ecology, specific impacts for groups, and economic issues. It may be the case that unfettered AVs would be the best for the economy in terms of jobs created and so on and so forth. However, it may be the case that unfettered AVs would be the worst in terms of lives saved by introduction of autonomous vehicles technology. With this, I will end. This paper is currently under review, and I'm happy to share the results with you if you send me an email and if you request it. Once it's published, I'm happy to share all that. I'm going to switch to the final topic, and I have what, 1 minute? All right, that's going to be easy. So again, this is actually published, so I'm happy to share this. And since I don't really have time to go into everything, I'm just going to run through the most important thing. The most important thing is that the current thinking about implementing moral decision-making in autonomous vehicles is one-sided. human moral judgment is more complex than what is currently being implemented. On the left-hand side, you see this is a figure taken from a fairly influential paper on machine ethics and machine morality, in which they considered only the consequences of a specific decision. And that is fine. This is important. This is something we need to be thinking about, but this is only one aspect of human moral decision making. In my other work, and I'm happy if you're interested to share a lot of that, I have developed a neurocomputational model of human moral decision making, which you can see here on the right-hand side, which is telling us that that now we know why human moral judgment is flexible yet stable. Let me give you an example. If you ask yourself, is lying wrong, you will come to the conclusion that it is. Then if someone asks you, would you lie to a serial killer that asks you where some people are hiding that they want to kill, you would say, of course I would lie. So how come you can say that it's morally acceptable to lie and to claim that it's morally wrong to lie? Are you in a complete contradiction? Actually, you're not. If you look at the model here on the right-hand side, you will see that the first question was asking about the action, about the deed of lying. And of course, lying is bad. This is not something that should be taken lightly. But this is not all there is in terms of moral decision making. Yes, we should obey rules of traffic. We should not go across a full line and so on and so forth. But we sometimes break the rules if we have urgent and important other ethical reasons to do that. The work that has been done in machine ethics is capturing this, the consequence aspect of moral decision making, and calculating how many people will be harmed or killed by the action of the autonomous vehicle. But what is missing is the agent intuition, or any consideration of the intentions of the agent. Now, this poses some technical problems. And if you look at the right-hand side, this table, my work has been, it's published in PLOS ONE. So the link to the article is here. You just click, you'll get the full article. And it's freely accessible to all. And you will see that we tested this on lay people and on professional ethicists, and we see that the three kinds of intuitions about morality, as well as three kinds of preferences for different kinds of moral theories, are shared between the lay public and professional philosophers. That's why we think that this approach has a better chance of being implemented in autonomous vehicles. The reason why we should be doing this is because if we do not look into the intentions of the agents, only about the consequences, then our good intentions in providing a technology may be abused. On the left-hand side, you will see a picture of Islamic State terrorists that are using trucks, and they are indeed using trucks. My computer crashed when I searched for this picture. Maybe the NSA thought I was up to something. And this is not a far-fetched sort of example. We had several terror attacks, and this is from a terror attack in Nice, where a person used a truck to ram pedestrians and other vehicles. And if we do not have a system in which the autonomous vehicle can detect in any way, shape, or form the intention of the agent, so whoever is operating the other vehicle or whoever is programming vehicles, then autonomous vehicles can and will be used by malicious actors for nefarious purposes. It is not only that we should be caring about these drastic events. After all, they're not common. That doesn't happen every day. On this side, this picture is kind of useful to give you an example of a truck that is stalled on a double full line. If autonomous vehicles are behind this truck, they will just stand there and do nothing and create horrible traffic jams. Whereas humans know when to break rules, right? So going back to this, with our complex neurocomputational machinery in decision making, we know when to break rules. I will not go into all the details. This is something I'm working on. Wish me luck. I hope to be funded for a 5-year project into looking into these issues and testing a formal algorithm that would implement this kind of moral decision making for machines, first in a simulated environment, and then I'm sort of very hopeful that in the future this can be implemented in real machines. Find out more about this. This has been published in Science and Engineering Ethics, and unfortunately it's not open access. We didn't have funds to make this open access, but if you send me an email, and you have my email here, I will be more than happy to send you a copy of the paper. Now, I know I'm over time, and I'm just gonna shut up now and allow you time for questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We have a few questions that we'll try to get to. Do you think that this will be put into some public use in the next 5, 10, or 20 years? Does it make the most sense to use in highly urban areas, which cannot currently meet traffic demand despite multimodal access?
So I presume that the question is about autonomous vehicles. So I will say that I'm not an expert on designing autonomous vehicles or implementing. My expertise lies in social and ethical issues. But having said that, that's the caveat. What I foresee is the complexity in implementing the system in urban environments. What I foresee is that autonomous vehicles will have a role to play in trucking industry, specifically in long-haul trucks and on highways. Whether we will need to implement specific lanes for autonomous vehicles or not, it remains to be seen. But in more complex areas, it will be, I would say, very detrimental to introduce autonomous vehicles ad hoc, because many pedestrians may be affected, and many cyclists and so on. Now, I'm not sure this is how it will pan out, and actually I'm sure that certain states will experiment with certain forms of autonomous vehicle implementation. But what I foresee are tragic accidents in which the public then asks for responsibility, and those states that opt for more regulation will actually have a better experience with the introduction of this technology. I hope this answers the question. If not, shoot me an email and I'll answer at length.
Thank you. Let's see. What do you think the greatest ethical challenge is for bringing AI transportation to the masses?
Well, it's hard to single out one greatest ethical challenge. I can say that what was considered the most important issue is in the multi-criteria decision analysis exercise was loss of lives. So I would say that the greatest challenge is to make sure that the autonomous vehicles are behaving in such a way that is predictable for human drivers, because we will not have a system overnight that has only autonomous vehicles. If that was the case, we would not have a lot of these issues. But pedestrians will not know what to expect from autonomous vehicles. And most importantly, other drivers will not know what to expect from autonomous vehicles. Current data is showing that autonomous vehicles, even in testing, are engaged in a lot of sudden braking, which humans cannot sort of deal with. It's the decision-making timeline is too fast for humans to react. That's why we have those rear-end collisions with autonomous vehicles. The challenge, I think, will be to make autonomous vehicles understand or functionally understand human decision-making. Does this make sense?
Thank you. I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions. Have you collaborated with governments? If so, what does that look like? And do you have talking points for our state legislators?
I have a full executive summary of the paper, which is now currently under review in the journal Science. Wish me luck. I'm expecting either that they will say, oh no, this is not good enough for Science, or outright rejection. We have been collaborating with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. and that was a good exercise. In fact, a couple of those transportation engineers, actually 3 of them, were from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. So we have had some collaboration in the past. Hopefully, we will have funds either coming from the National Science Foundation or from other sources to kind of have a longer and more fruitful collaboration in terms of the regulation of autonomous vehicles. If this does not answer the question, please feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to respond.
Great. Well, we are at our time here. Thank you so much, Dr. Dubuik, for being with us. For attendees whose questions we did not get to, I will forward them on and we will get those answered for you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you again. We appreciate your time. All right, attendees that are still on, we are going to take a 5-minute break so that I can set up our next speaker. Please feel free to stay logged in, but you can grab coffee, take a little stretch break, and we will resume at 10 a.m. Thanks so much. Dr. Menounos, can you hear me? Joe, I can see your presentation. I cannot hear your audio.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, perfect. There we go.
Yeah, I had more than one mute on. So sorry about that.
No.
So you only see the presentation on the screen?
Correct. I just see the presentation.
Okay. All right. Good. I got it. I was flipping back and forth between screens here trying to get the right thing.
It looks great. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll get started in about 3 minutes.
Okay. So is this the second presentation of the day?
Correct. The second presentation.
And how many go on today? I wasn't clear. Just 2 today, or is there more?
Just 2 today and 2 tomorrow.
Okay. Got it. It looked like you got about 80-something people.
Correct.
And I assume they're all engineers, since this is NSPE's effort.
Right, all professional engineers.
You have an idea of is this younger, more experienced, all range of all?
It's a wide range.
Okay. Not a problem. Well, there you are. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. Like you're working from home like most people.
I am.
Good for you.
Yes.
Yeah, I teach class this morning, so I just got back.
Was it in person?
Actually, I'm teaching in person. Well, I have a hybrid course, they call it. So and then they have a synchronous and non-synchronous. But anyway, I teach online and in the classroom at the same time,
okay.
Which is interesting. I taught, just online last spring, but the whole idea of the classrooms are just not designed to be taught online while you're teaching people. The cameras and such. I mean, they actually did a good job of setting it up, but it just doesn't convey well. I'm sure I'd be clearer and easier to see if it was either all online or all in person, but that's not what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay, you're all set?
I am.
All right. We will go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everyone, to the PENC Ethics Seminar. Again, if you have any technical issues, please use the chat box and I will try to assist you. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. You can type those into the questions box and I will read them out loud to our speaker. Our next session is Professional Responsibility, Ethics, and the 21st Century Learned Professional. We have Dr. Joe Manous. As the director of the Institute for Water Resources, Dr. Joe Manous oversees a multidisciplinary field operating agency that supports USACE's civil works missions through water resources planning, policy and decision support model development, hydraulic and hydrological engineering, dam and levee safety, and training and national international interface with academia, professional societies, and non-government organizations. Prior to becoming IWR director, Joe served as a water resources engineer and manager for international activities at IWR, where he specialized in the areas of water resources and environmental security issues associated with water. Dr. Manous is a retired U.S. Army Corps of Engineers officer, and his last active duty assignment was as Academy Professor at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he taught courses in environmental engineering, water resources, and environmental security. Dr. Manous is currently an adjunct professor at George Mason University, teaching courses in engineering economics and water resources, and is the past president of the American Academy of Water Resources Engineers. He is a past chair of the board for the National Institute of Engineering Ethics and past chair of the ASCE Committee on Professional Practice. Dr. Manous is a graduate of the Georgia Institute of Technology, North Georgia College, University of Illinois, U.S. Army War College, and University of Minnesota. He is active in several professional engineering organizations to include American Society of Civil Engineers, National Society of Professional Engineers, National Institute of Engineering Ethics, Society of American Military Engineers, Order of the Engineer, and the Army Engineer Association. Dr. Manous is the recipient of the 2018 ASCE President's Award for Distinguished Service to the Nation, a board-certified water resources engineer of the American Academy of Water Resources Engineers, and a registered professional engineer in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. If I'd have known you were going to read it, I'd have shortened it and make it a little easier. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I have the opportunity to talk on ethics, engineering ethics specifically, from time to time, and this is something I think is important. Probably from a perspective that some of you might not have considered, which is why we're having this conversation. Just give a little more context. I work for the federal government, and more specifically, the Department of Defense, which is interesting in that I work strictly with water resource problems, and that's just a unique caveat to the U.S. form of government that water resources mission falls under the Army. It goes back long in history, but anyway. Because I do work for the federal government, we have a lot of ethics trainings that we're required to take. And it's true training. I wouldn't call it education. Matter of fact, we have 4 requirements right now, and 2 of them have just popped up in the last 60 days. One of them that we do every year is for those of us who sign off on the transfer, the appropriation, well, not the appropriation, but the allocation of funds, and certify that they're used for the proper purpose. We take ethics training, all taught by an attorney. Those people who are managing contracts, we call them contract officer representatives, they have a separate training and some similarities, but really, again, taught by attorney, and it's about fiscal responsibility and having the right connection or association with the people with whom we do business. We have 2 new requirements. One of them, I'm sure it's because it's election year, we have political ethics, which comes out of something called the Hatch Act, which limits our ability as a federal employee to campaign or discuss political activities in the workplace or in affiliation with our duty responsibilities. And then the last training is just an overarching that all the Department of Defense is having to take, military and civilian, on true ethical behavior. In a lot of ways, it goes back to fiscal responsibilities, but it's also discusses a good bit about behaving in such a way as to uphold the responsibilities that we are charged with our office. And in this last ethics training we're taking, it bleeds over into what I'm going to discuss today, engineering ethics, which has a particular focus, at least from my point of view. What we're going to talk about, we're going to look at some philosophical perspectives, kind of dead man quote approach, and then we're going to look at practical implications, why that's important. I taught a class this morning about water resources. How do we plan, design large projects in the public sector? And the whole genesis or the whole underpinning of that course, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is very similar in that it's about our ability as learned professionals, engineer or whatever discipline you fall in, to act in such a way that the public has trust in us. And without that trust, it's hard for us to come to agreement on how to proceed on a project which may cost tens of millions of dollars. And that's not a trivial question, but to understand it, I think you have to look at why people think the way they do. And most of us are familiar with these concepts I'm going to cover, but the idea of thinking through them consciously is probably something we don't do often enough. And that's why we have these sorts of educational opportunities. Talk a little bit about rules. What are I assume most everybody on the line is a professional engineer, and therefore you subscribe to some ethical conduct by your state. And state guidance on that varies widely. Not many states I've found actually have a code of ethics, but they do have codes of conduct or professional responsibility. Each one of them labels it differently. But there are common themes to all of them that are unique to the practice of engineering. And then we have a couple of case studies if we have time. So let's talk a little bit about philosophical. What are different ways of looking at how humans behave? And the first is utilitarianism. And as it says on the slide, promote the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. I call this the Mr. Spock, where Star Trek, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That's what this whole concept is about. And it comes from John Stuart Mill, and you can see there, mid-19th century. And it gets back to the idea of good derives into pleasurable or good outcomes, and bad behavior results in pain or undesirable outcomes. And it also gets to this idea of an action is either right or wrong depending on the consequence. And you got to be careful about that particular concept because, it can lead to hedonism, but it's also how do people perceive you? If you're working from an individual point of view and you say whatever I can do and it turns out okay, then that must be all right. If I'm driving down the road and the speed limit is 55 and I'm doing 65 and nobody stops me, well, is that okay or is it not? More substantive questions are if you're designing a particular type of project and you know that the energy consumption of it is more than could be designed for if you went a slightly different direction, but you get a slight economic savings to the owner. What is your responsibility? Is the outcome really what measures how you behave in the workplace? Virtue ethics. Happiness is an activity of a soul in accordance with perfect virtue. This came from Aristotle. And the idea that good means that you live a prosperous and good life. The whole idea is that you're trying to be a good person. And because you think it's a good thing to do, that's how you behave. You're not as concerned, well, you are concerned about the consequences, but that's consequence alone doesn't derive how you conduct yourself. And it talks about being virtuous, meaning you're consistent, your behavior is similar in every instance, as opposed to situational ethics, where you behave one way in one audience and another way in another. A lot of codes of conduct that different states implement actually talk to this point in a very, very pointed way, that it's difficult to separate your personal life from your work life. If you are caught and your picture ends up in the paper with a DUI, that has a reflection on the industry. It has a reflection on your firm, that maybe there's something not quite right about what you're doing. Now, it happens, and some people, and particularly in today's society, feel my private life's my private life, and it has no impact on anything else. What I've learned is that the public and your customers, they have a way of deciding for themselves what they think is right or not right. And just because you may not want an aspect of your personal life to impact your work life doesn't mean that you can enforce that will on others. And this becomes a big deal, because I'm going to talk a little bit later about working with imperfect information, but how you represent yourself is, in all situations, is how people perceive that you will act moving into the future, at least most of the time. Respect for others, the ethic of reciprocity. I think all of you have heard this, regardless of the religious or cultural background you come from. The idea of doing unto others before as you would have them do unto you. I actually have a slide somewhere that talks about all the various religions, how they all have adopted some concept in their underpinnings or philosophy. So Kant had this idea that you do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, and that takes a lot of guts. A lot of decisions are in the workplace. You become concerned that if you make a particular decision, you will be put off the team. Someone else will step in and take over, or you will continue on, and the next project that comes up, you may be considered too difficult to work with. But the idea is that in the long term, people come back to the folks they can trust, not the ones who gave them the quick answer. And they're clearly in our society, and any society for that matter. There are people that will work that way no matter what. But I think as a professional engineer, our responsibility is to behave in such a way that people will have trust in us, and acknowledge that we're human, acknowledge that we all have faults, but that they do have trust that we're going to try to do the right thing. And then there's the idea of intuition. We've all heard women's intuition, your mother's intuition. Your mom knew you were doing something wrong, even though you didn't actually come out and say it. She could just pick it up. There's the idea of gambler's intuition, which doesn't seem very logical. Las Vegas makes a living off people thinking they have a gambler's intuition. But then there's also the idea of a spiritual intuition. And this is something that's a little more tangible, or at least you can step back and look at it. And the idea that innate in all of us is an idea of moral conscience or moral character. I've got a couple of examples up there. Some of you may know about the Pinto fuel tank crisis, where Ford made a decision that it was cheaper to not retrofit the gas tank flaw that they identified and just pay off the losses as accidents occurred, even deaths. That was just cheaper than recalling all the Pintos. And they got caught. An internal memo became available, and it gets back to the consequence. It was okay as long as they didn't get caught. Or Volkswagen with their idea of changing the coding in the computer inside their cars so that they looked like they were getting better gas mileage than they were. All okay as long as they don't get caught. Is that the view of this? But the idea was they kept it secret. They didn't tell people that they were doing these things because they knew they were not acceptable from society standards or maybe their personal standards, but whatever. It wasn't acceptable, and they knew that. And the other is genocide, whether you're looking at World War II or some of the wars in Southeast Asia or Northern Africa. People keep these things secret. They don't go out and brag about the people that they killed. Why is that? Well, I would suggest it's because they know deep down that was not the right thing to do, that society does not accept it. And then, of course, those are extremes. And there are all kinds of areas in between in terms of our personal behavior, how we treat others, that could be considered examples of moral conscience or moral character. Is it societal character or personal character? We could debate those things ad nauseum. But the point is, they're not accepted, and we have to figure out where we stand in terms of our own comfort level as well as within our profession. So 3 areas of responsibility when it comes to engineering ethics. One is to society, the other is to the employer-client, the other is to the profession. There was a handout, and matter of fact, I saw it in the go-to attachment, which includes information that I would recommend you take a look at. One of the first thing that's in there is an excerpt from the Fundamentals of Engineering Research, Fundamentals of Engineering exam booklet. It's the one that, or the reference manual, I should say exam, the reference manual. It's the one you take when you take the FEE. And the only reference you get is the one you get from NCEES. And in those few pages, they talk about engineering ethics. And these are the 3 areas that they identify. And I find that to be the most coherent reference that I found to talk about engineering ethics. So when you look at the 3 groups, what is it that we're really talking about? To society, now I'm a civil engineer, and the overarching preamble to the ASCE Code of Ethics is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. That guides everything that we do, and I believe that, and I think that is an inherent responsibility of who we are as professionals, that we will look at the health, safety, and welfare of the public. We also have a responsibility to our employer or the client that provide economic as well as safe and sustainable products and or services, whichever we're working on. And so that seems very logical. I mean, you can accept that. I believe that you have a responsibility to the people that are paying for your services, and that's what that's about. The third one there is to the profession. And I've given this in a variety of forums, and I was talking to a group of seniors at a university one time, and a young lady said that was very arrogant to think that one of our responsibilities was back to the profession. And I don't think so. I strongly believe that that's probably one of the more important. And the reason to me is quite simple. We work in what's called a learned profession. I mean, there are all kinds of professionals. There's professional race car drivers, there's professional bowlers, there's even professional wrestlers. In those contexts, professional means that they are doing something, an activity to make a living. What we're talking about is a learned professional, which belongs to a unique group through experience, education, and special skills, is able to provide a service to the client and also serve society. And we do that with imperfect information. And that's really important, that imperfect information. And if we were to search for absolute answers on everything we are trying to do, the cost would be exorbitant. And not only that, we would probably never finish some projects in a search for perfection. When do you make a call that you have enough information to make a reasonable decision, engineering judgment, about how to design a project, what are the different alternatives, and whether a particular action or activity is safe or not? Those require all those 3 things I mentioned: special education, sufficient experience, and unique skill sets. And so because we belong to this learning profession, we operate in this area of gray, you want to call it that everything's not black and white. And we are able to do that for only one reason. I'd ask people in the chat if you know what it is. I know usually in a class or an audience, I'll ask why do you think what do you think the main reason we're able to do this? We're able to serve as learned professionals. Not used to having somebody ask a question in the middle. Anybody want to chat it out? Not hearing anything or seeing anything. All right. It's because the public trusts us. That's the only reason we can work with imperfect information. I once had a very senior engineer come back and tell me that, no, he didn't believe that the reason we can do this, he could do it, was because he had so many years of experience. He knew everything there was to know about that problem, and he could make those decisions. He was positioned through all the things I already mentioned to be able to make those decisions. And I disagreed with it. I said, yes, that allows you to be positioned to do it, but to actually make those decisions, that's up to the public. They do it because they trust you. And when they take away that trust, and I've been in practice for a while, and I know that trust has eroded over time as lawsuits have become more plentiful, as the amount of scrutiny that or people willing to take a look at things increases. Then we all see that this idea of trust becomes more and more important. A lot of people say, I don't want to make those decisions. I will back off from the responsible charge and just do the calculations. But that's not what a learned professional does. A learned professional, and what makes my job interesting, is I do have to make those decisions, and I have to be articulate about why I made the decisions and defend them. And that's what we're training engineers to do. I have something called a board certification in water resource engineering. And what that means is that beyond getting a professional engineer license, I continue to learn, continue to build my experience base, and then sat for an exam and said that, yes, I can operate at a higher level. But that's consistent with my idea of what a learned professional is about, that we have to operate in this world of imperfect information. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. A lot of people go into engineering because they're very comfortable with numbers and maybe less comfortable with people. And that's really not, there's a role for that, there's a place for that. But at some point, projects are built for people using the resources they provided us, which are funds. So if you run into a situation and you're trying to decide, well, is this the kind of behavior I should demonstrate? I have this list of tests that you can use. It's also in the handout. And if you don't save anything else from the discussion today, just take that one page and hang on to it. I find it can be quite helpful. And I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Harms tests. You're weighing what is the harm versus what are the short and long-term benefits. We actually do that in a lot of project evaluation analysis. Reversibility, what I think is a good choice if I traded places, say with the environmental group that has objections. If I put myself in their position, how would I feel about this project? And can I find a solution that's more of a win-win for everybody? What would a professional colleague say? Am I doing this and I'm not sharing it with anybody else because I don't want to hear what they have to say about it? They may object or provide comments about other things to investigate, and I'm worried about that. Then I got to ask myself, am I comfortable that the solution I'm coming up with really makes sense and is using the experience, the education, and special skills that I have? Is it legal? This one's actually kind of easy. You ask your attorney. They'll go to the law, but to be honest, legal standards are oftentimes lower than the ethical standards. Ethical standards are, as most codes of ethics, aspirational. And if you belong to a professional society, NSPE or ASCE, ASME, IEEE, and you break their code of ethics, usually the only thing that happens is they kick you out of their society. If you break the code of conduct for a state, you could lose your license. And of course, one decision can reinforce another. But the legal standards are usually much, much lower. And if we're striving for legal standard, I'd say you're not striving to be a learned professional. Publicity, probably the most important of all of these. If what you are doing was published on the front page of the Washington Post, or whatever your local paper is, would you have a problem with it? If you have a problem with it, you got to ask yourself why. And is it because you're trying to hide something? It's not well developed, whatever it is. And that's a hard test because we all know there's oftentimes funding limitations. You can't explore as far as you want to go, but somewhere along the line, we have to make up our own mind about how we feel about something. And that's where this publicity test comes in. Common practice, if everybody did what you're doing, how would things operate? Or are you just trying to get away with it? Getting back to some of the philosophical ideas that I suggested earlier. Wise relative. This is my number 2. And for me, it's with my grandmother, if I took and explained this to her in kind of layman's terms, what would she think of me? And if she didn't like it, that gives me a problem. And everybody has somebody in their life, a spouse, a relative, a friend, that they think highly of. And if you feel that you would not want to explain this to them, then you got to ask yourself, is what you're doing the right thing? Are you trying to hide what you're doing? And then how will you feel about yourself after it's over with? And that's a tough one, because a lot of times decisions are made for short-term gains, because it's a problem, you got to get through it, and then you got to live with the consequences later on. But still, early in the decision process is oftentimes the place where the real differences are made in terms of ethical decisions, but they're also the easiest to pass by because the consequence doesn't occur right away. Some of the sessions that I hold, I have some videos that I show which really highlight this concept better than anything I can say, and we can have discussions. But for an online session, those aren't really the approach to take. I can give you some references if you're interested. So let's look at some codes of ethics. If we look at the ASCE Code of Ethics, it has 4 overarching principles. I already mentioned uphold, advance integrity, honor, and dignity of the profession by using their knowledge and skill to do good things, honest and impartial. Most codes of conduct and state codes do mention this about honest and impartial. Striving to increase competence and prestige of the profession. This gets back to being a learned professional. And as a code of ethics, the idea that we're trying to increase your competence and prestige, that's important. A lot of codes, and the ASC code's one of them, that says that we shouldn't be advertising what our services, because we do not operate on the lowest cost. Now, I'm sure some of you know where that doesn't apply, where you low bid on a government contract, is one that won. But the idea is you're supposed to be selecting people, can they do the job, not just who will give you the lowest cost. And if we don't stand up as a profession to say this is the level where we can protect society and serve our customers, who is going to do it? We can turn it over to the attorneys, and they're going to do it in laws in courts. I hope that's not where we default and give up our responsibility too. And then support the professional and technical societies. And this is important because we have to band together. As individuals, we can carry a lot of weight locally, but we need to have a common view that other people, our customers, the general public that served by our products and services can understand and appreciate. And then there's 8 fundamental canons for the ASC Code of Ethics. The first one I already cited, hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Only operate in areas of competence. That's an important one. There's not a lot of regulation. California probably has the most in terms of specifically having a body limit the area you work in. We are supposed to be responsible enough to pick and choose the projects where we can provide the services that the customer supports. I was recently asked to do some stormwater work. I'm in Northern Virginia, and I was asked to do a pretty simple project. It wouldn't have been hard, but I turned it down because even though I'm licensed in Virginia, I have not been working stormwater projects. I know how to do them in Virginia, so I wasn't current on the county and the city permits and codes. And because of that, even though I could have figured it out, I was not the right person to provide that service. And it's been some quick money, but wasn't the right thing to do. We only say things that are objective and truthful. Act as faithful agents. We're not being subversive. We're not working against our peers, and we're not trying to mislead our customers by giving them an answer that they're willing to accept at that point in time. We build our professional reputation on the merit of our services. what is the resume that you and your firm puts together that becomes the basis. And this ties into the idea of lowest bid, that may not be the lowest bid, but we can do this particular job because we have the right skills and experience and education. And this idea of upholding and enhancing the honor, integrity, and dignity of the profession gets back to being a learned professional. And if our profession is not well regarded, and I can say that engineering is still well regarded in the United States, and civil engineering I know is, because I work in that area, by the public. They trust us. They ask us a lot of questions. They will criticize us, but in general, I do believe that they are trusting us, and they allow us to make these decisions with imperfect information. We continue to improve, and this is all the more important as the body of knowledge doesn't grow at a steady rate, but an increasing rate in this world of information technology, global information exchange. The opportunities to make a mistake are I don't know if they're increased, but certainly the scrutiny over a possibility is greater. And we shouldn't be doing it because we're afraid we get caught. We should be doing it because we know it's the right thing. And it leads us to become more specialized. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is the direction. And then the last canon is the one that ASCE added most recently 2 years ago, to treat all persons fairly, regardless of gender, race, national origin, ethnicity, religion, or age. So those are the way ASCE looks at it. If we look at NSPE, they have 6 overarching canons or fundamental canons, and if you look at them, they're pretty similar. And that's I think that's not because people intended for them to be similar. It's because people look at learning professions in a similar way. About the health, safety, and welfare responsibility, avoid deceptive acts, speak truthfully. These all get back to the idea of being a good person, acting in a way that people will regardless of the setting you're in, whether that's at it's your daughter's softball game or at a PTA meeting or a Chamber of Commerce, that people trust you in the same way in those settings as they do when they hire you or inquire about your services as a learned professional. If you look at Virginia Standards of Practice and Conduct, you can see the topics they have listed. It's not written like a code of ethics, like the 2 we just looked at, but if you look at the topics, they're very similar. Responsibility of the public, public statements, conflict of interest, good standing in other jurisdictions. I mean, I hope that you're starting to see a consistent theme to the way engineering profession, engineering ethics as a learned professional is consistent, even though it's written different, regardless, depending on the jurisdiction. North Carolina, I thought they had a very interesting way of writing their rules of professional conduct. Safeguard the life, health, property, and welfare of the public. I hope most of you are very familiar with this. That they're also binding up every person holding a certificate of licensure as a professional engineer. So that's what the rules are. And then they go on for several pages. This is in your handout as well. You can have access to the slides if you like. But it talks about protecting the public health, safety, and welfare of the public, protect the public professional duties, and I'll let you read it. It's the same message I've been saying all along. Other things, licensee perform services only in their area of competence. They have to make a decision on that. No one else is going to be as qualified to do that. Only issue truthful statements, avoid conflicts of interest, solicit work only on the basis of qualifications. I mean, we're not the ones that should have, the insurance commercials where they have funny birds and little lizards and all these other things that go out and try to promote on some kind of a gimmick. We're not even really supposed to be advertising. We can have our business listed in the yellow pages, but people should be referring to us based off of our competence, not off of our advertisement, trying to get people's attention, not based off merit. So that's the discussion that I have, overview of the way I view engineering ethics, the way most professional societies view engineering ethics, and the NCAAS, who issues provides the fundamentals of engineering exam and the professional engineer exams view ethics. I think I'd stop right there before I go into the next section and say, does anybody have any questions?
We have one in the queue. Most cities and counties today are selecting non-engineers to be their directors, public works, community development, etc., and sometimes engineering departments. The reason is varied, but all decisions stem from engineers not always being to do what politicians want. How do you see the profession going? This is one of the highest ethical dilemmas that faces our profession today, in my opinion. Your thoughts on this topic would be appreciated.
I agree with that. But my view is that we shouldn't be putting the blame, well, maybe a wrong word, blame. We shouldn't be putting the onus back on the city council or the county board to say, we only want to hire an engineer. All we need is engineers to step up and provide that sort of insight, that connectivity with whoever the legislative board is, to say that I not only have the skill sets to give you a good answer, an appropriate answer, but I can also fill that role of bridging the gap between politics and the reality. I have a story. In the last administration, I was working on some things with the Council of Environmental Quality. It's one of the executive branch offices. And I was in there with a very, very well-educated, bright group of people talking about some water policy. And we actually got into a discussion about, well, some of the others did, about implementing a policy. And I had to interrupt them and say, you can't have a policy which basically directs that water can flow uphill, which is really where it was getting to. They were so caught up in the idea of what the outcome, the constituents wanted, that the idea that the water was flowing downhill was really the underlying issue that we're having to deal with, and they just sort of moved past that. And these are highly educated, smart people. And once I pointed it out to them, they came back to where I thought the conversation ought to go. And I think that's true in a local government, that we have to be as capable as engineers to engage with people on business issues as well as technical issues if we want to be the right people. For us just to try to put out a blanket statement saying that, it's really a bad idea to hire the head of your public works to be a business graduate as opposed to an engineer, it's not going to win people over. I mean, it's nice to say, I would support it, but the reality is we need to step up our individually to say that we are the people that can do this, and people are going to pick their people they know oftentimes anyway, but that's how we make a difference. I don't know if I've answered your question or not.
That's great. We've got one more. Why do you think the public trust has eroded, and how can it be repaired?
Well, public trust has eroded for a lot of reasons. I believe that the availability of information has made it very possible for people to scrutinize issues to a degree that we've never been able to do before. And because we do that, we're oftentimes not prepared individually or as a group to provide an alternative explanation for that's convincing about why something is the way it is. I know that's a very vague kind of answer. To be more specific, just like the last question, I believe that we as civil engineers have got to become better skilled at conveying what is the issue that needs to be addressed, as opposed to what we want to tell people the answer is. In the class that I'm teaching right now, I start the first day by drawing a Venn diagram where I have a circle which represents all the technical solutions, engineered solutions that could be possible for a problem. And then I start drawing other circles that are relevant to the problem. One is going to be an environmental circle, and it's going to overlap partially. And then there's going to be an economic consideration, where if you visualize the circle as being all possible solutions with the optimal solution of that circle being in the dead center, you're now working in the periphery of all of these. And then one of the most important circles is the social cultural, and that's expressed through politics. So that idea of where do all of those circles overlap, and how do we as individuals within our profession convey in a convincing and in a method that is understandable by the public about why that solution provides the values that we offer. I think that's important. The other thing that's necessary is that when we put together our options, that we have the visibility to put ourselves in the position of the person that's being, that we're assisting or we're providing a service to, look at it from their point of view. What are the things that really concern them? Because without that concern, or our understanding of that concern, we will come up with solutions that are just off the mark. In my office, we have a center of expertise for collaboration, public participation and collaboration. And the main thing that they do is that we use, the term is called shared vision planning, but using, well, what we do is water, so it's hydraulic models, sometimes hydrology models. We will break those down into very simple components. Certainly not at the level of some very sophisticated HEC RAS or other some groundwater models, but something that helps people make decisions because they start to understand what the implications are. And we start at a very basic level, spend time with all the constituents to help them try to come up with a solution that allows them to feel like they're part of the process, understand the constraints of what they're doing, and at the same time, hopefully get the key points of what they're interested in. We call it collaborative negotiations as opposed to positional negotiations. And it gets back to this idea, how do we change? We change by changing the way we put forward projects so that we spend more time understanding what the customer and the people affected are interested in, improving our ability to communicate with others in a way that's not about engineering, but also about what they want to know. And whether that we do it or we hire somebody else to do it. And through that, we become part of we include people in the decision-making process. One of the most challenging things for the federal government was in 1986, at least in the Water Resources, we had a Water Resource Development Act. It required, after that point, that all water resource projects that are federally funded had to be cost shared with the local entity. So you had to have a state or community that would put up 35% of the cost. And that could be a lot of money if it's a $50 million project. And what really shocked the federal government was when people started putting in 35% of the dollars, they wanted to have at least 35% of the say on how it turned out, if not more. And that was something that in the life or the career of the federal employees at the time, they'd never dealt with before. They should have, they didn't. We've adjusted since then. But that idea of we know the answer because we understand the issues and these other people just don't get it. We got to get past that. And we've got to become bigger part of the community as a whole. And that takes us out of our comfort zone.
All right, we don't have any other questions at this time.
Oh gosh, no more questions? Either I'm confusing everybody or y'all are asleep. I don't know which.
One just came through. How does our profession encourage major utility companies engage PEs on staff and as consultants when building their system when they currently do not, such as Spectrum Cable?
I believe that that's called the, is it professional exemption? I'm drawing a blank on the term right now. But it's not just in utilities, it also applies in some other industries where, industrial exemptions, what I'm trying to think of, where no requirement that you have a professional engineer license to do that job. I mean, where I am now, I'm in the federal government, but I'm licensed by a state. There is no requirement that a federal employee, for any work that I do, I stamp a drawing, because I would never stamp a federal drawing with a state license. That's just not the way we do business. But to get to show progress and to show that I have certain minimum standards, I pursued a PE, as do most of my colleagues. The idea of industrial exemption allows people to practice without going through the process of getting a license. If you follow the NSPE blog, I get it every day. You see quite often people are discussing this point. Some are saying that, well, I've known people who had PEs and they did a terrible job. So getting a PE doesn't mean anything. And I've also seen others that said that I got the job because I had the right qualifications, PE being one of them. I think in the same sense, I'll back up one other thing. One of the major initiatives by the American Society of Civil Engineers for the last 25 years has been to encourage licensure boards at the state level to change the licensure rules so that they not only required a undergraduate EAC, engineering accrediting certification from NCAAS to be eligible to sit for the fundamentals of engineering exam and then the PE, but that you also have at least 30 additional credits of education in a technical field that contributes to the depth of knowledge. And they were unsuccessful. They never got a single state to change the rules. A lot of engineers just didn't support the idea that you needed a master's degree, which is one way of getting your 30 extra credits, or other education, that the bachelor degree was sufficient to be able to do what they were doing. And I understand that. There are areas within engineering where you have to have a special set of skills to get started, and you do that same task in a similar way, say for the next 20 years, and you will do it well. You will do it more efficiently, more economically than anyone else, and that's an valued and important role. There are also roles where the complexity of the work continues to increase. So over 20 years, over 20 different years, you have increased your complexity and the nature of the projects you work in to take on additional responsibilities and additional complexity. And those are two different career paths. They're both necessary. They're both needed. And they're both right. So when you get to the idea of industrial exemption, you have the idea that someone has a particular set of skills and they will grow. I'm not saying they don't, but that within those set of skills, there's the idea of going and getting a license isn't necessary because their business gives them greater oversight than a professional engineer license would have. I counter that to say that the idea that you have a professional engineer license means that you not only graduated from an accredited university, but you've also demonstrated through the licensure process a minimum number of years of experience, and you also were capable of passing an exam that went into depth in your field. I will not disagree that there are people who do that and then mess up. There are people who do that and are unethical. But I think as a profession, our responsibility isn't to point out individual acts where it wasn't successful, but look at how we move the profession as a whole into a viewpoint of we are all in this together, and it's our responsibility to each other that enhances our professional responsibility and how we are favorably or not viewed by the public. And going back to the last question about what we can do to change the way we behave or change the public's perception of us as engineers, it is to behave in an honest way. That is it. Most engineers do. But we not only need to do that, but we also need to be involved. We need to be parts of chambers of commerce. We need to join Rotary clubs. We need to join civic groups. And we need to be not just in our own little world, but part of the community that we are serving. Because it's through that community leadership that our engineering skills will then be taken more seriously and more effectively listened to. I wandered all over that question, but hopefully I got said something useful.
We have a few more. Do you have suggestions for preparing students to think more deeply about ethical decision making as engineers to prepare them for their professional lives?
Absolutely. We're not going to get to this. We're going to run out of time. But you see up on the screen these ethical situations, and these are written in your packet. You can use those I'm convinced the most boring type of lectures are ethics. Absolutely. I mean, they are sleepers. So to get people thinking about this, you need to have them engaged. So this is the least preferred medium that we're using right now for me to talk about ethics. But the idea is that if you get into a classroom, you get some scenarios, and I have a whole bunch of them. And some of them have reading parts where you have individual students read what they're doing and read what their part of that scenario is. And then you get them into groups of 4 or 5 people and give them some questions and say, how will you respond to Jim's dilemma that they ran into in this question? What do you think they should do? And then have them brief it back to the group. It gets back to this idea of being engaged, being able to say, talk about what your point is. I think that is the most effective. What's even more effective is to have say an NSPE meeting where you have students and more seasoned engineers. In those discussions, students learn a lot, because if you have only students, they only have the student view. But if you get 2 or 3 people that have actually lived through those experiences and they respond to the question based off an experience they had, that shapes people's minds more than anything I've ever seen. The other thing that's available is there's some videos that the National Institute of Engineering Ethics put together, and they all run about 30, 45 minutes. And you can start, stop, ask questions. They have training materials with them, and they're just interactive. And again, it sets up a scenario, and then you got to kind of facilitate the conversation, get people to talking about why they think it's important. And people will be surprised how some people will look at a problem in a completely different way. And that's the interesting thing about ethics. There usually isn't a right answer. There are multiple choices that can be made. And it's up to us to figure out what is the choice that's right for us. And legal answers have black and white. I mean, that's the nature of the legal system. But ethics are aspirational because we're striving something better, higher, because why? Because the public has to trust us. And we are trying to do something that sets us apart. Some engineers say, I don't want that responsibility. And I got to say that if you don't want that responsibility, that is how the learned profession of engineering loses credibility within the public.
All right, it looks like we've got one more question. Are you familiar with the American Council of Engineering Companies? They are the contractors, domestic and foreign, who control engineers, and ACEC has people on state boards. This may be the reason that the word safety has disappeared from the North Carolina definition of duties to life, health, and property.
I'm familiar with ACEC, and I don't know about the relationship with dropping safety out of the North Carolina Code. I'm not familiar with that point. But I can say that ACEC was one of when I talked before about changing the licensure rules in each state so it required more formal education, they were one of the most outspoken opponents to doing that. They just didn't think that the bar, maybe it's called raise the bar didn't need to be raised. It's at the level it is, and they really don't need more. I disagree with them, but I disagree with my peers on raise the bar, in that I don't believe all engineers are the same. I believe it's a very wide, the enterprise of engineering is a wide range of people filling a wide range of responsibilities, and we do not yet have a licensure or a credentialing system that adequately describes the groups of people's roles within that enterprise. And that's part of the challenge. Without that ability to help people understand where they are, how do we convey to anybody else where we are? I mean, think about it. You're going to stand up and say, I have a PE, when somebody tries, what does the PE mean? And, you can go through the, education experience and took a test. And some people are going to say, well, how does that help me with my project? And being able to articulate what the role of a learning professional is a skill that we don't teach and we don't practice nearly as much as we should.
All right, well, that looks to be it. Thank you very much for your time. Do you have any final thoughts?
I don't know if you have my email address. I don't know if it was in the handout or not. I can't remember, but you're more than welcome to contact me if you have other questions. I think discussing engineering ethics annually, some states require that, is necessary to keep it in front of our mind. One of the things I think people get from these discussions, and it's unfortunate we don't really have a discussion here. We have me talking. Is that people find that other people really do think the way they do. The majority of people think the way they do. And the hard ethical decisions that they have to make, other people think that way as well, but they're shy about speaking up because it may come across inappropriately. And so I think having these conversations is important for multiple reasons other than just so you can get renew your license.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time. Attendees that are on, thank you for attending today's ethics seminar. We hope you enjoyed today's sessions. Your PDH certificates will be emailed out this afternoon. If you are not a member of PENC and NSPE, we hope you'll head to our website and learn more about our other upcoming programs. We have a webinar series. We have libation conversations, which are virtual networking socials. And in December, we will have our annual Raleigh seminar where you can earn up to 18 PDHs. So head to our website, penc.org, for more information about all of those. If you're joining us tomorrow, we will see you then. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.